Chapter 18 of the Airplane Boys Among the Clouds. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Airplane Boys Among the Clouds by John Luther Langworthy. Chapter 18. At the Foot of the Liberty Pole. "Look out!" shouted Frank, who was trying to find some sort of weapon himself, armed with which he could hasten to the aid of his chum. But Andy kept his senses well about him. Perhaps had he been alone, and there opened a favorable chance whereby he could put a convenient fence between himself and those grim square jaws of the ugly dog, he would have been only too glad to do so. But that was utterly out of the question now. The girl must be defended, come what might. He fortunately remained fairly cool, which was a good point in his favor. Just then, singular to say, Andy seemed to remember what he had read about what old Putnam said to his colonials at the Battle of Bunker Hill. "Wait till you can see the whites in their eyes, boys." He held himself back until he was positive that he could land the blow on that massive head of the prize bulldog. Whack! The wonder was that Andy did not crush the beast's skull in with the monkey wrench. He surely would, had he struck with all his strength, but being afraid that if he missed connections he might lose his balance and be seized by the brute, he only tapped for a single, as he afterwards remarked. It staggered the beast at any rate, and drove him back a foot, stopping his onward rush. "Good! Give him another like that, Andy. I'm coming right along," whooped Frank, who had managed to lay hold on some sort of tool which he carried for emergencies, and was jumping forward as fast as he could move. The dog tried a second time to seize the daring boy in those cruel white fangs. He presented a terrible sight just then, for there was blood showing on his white hair where the edge of the monkey wrench had struck. "You will you?" gasped the boy, who had thrown himself into a position of readiness once more with his novel weapon upraised. This time the dog tried to duck the descending blow. Had his ruse been successful, undoubtedly Andy would have found his ankle fast in the grip of those terrible teeth before he could recover. But again he had figured on such a move, and as he swung the tool downward he jumped forward a pace himself. It was meeting the ball before the break came, as they would have it in baseball language. Crunch! That was surely a good sound crack. The force had been visibly increased, too, so that the brute was knocked completely over in a kicking heap. "Try it again if you want to," shouted the now aroused Andy. "Plenty more like that left." "Hi, hold on there. What are you sneaking away for? Not had your fill yet, have you, pup? I guess you've got a streak of yellow in you. No prize dog about you. Well, goodbye then. Next time I call, I'll try and do better by you." The dog seemed half dazed by that last blow. Struggling to its feet, it began to run away, though hardly able to keep a direct course. Frank arrived on the scene just too late to be of any assistance, but then, as it turned out, his cousin had not really needed help. "Well done, Andy, old fellow," he exclaimed proudly, as he seized the hand of his cousin and shook it heartily. "I'm glad to own you as a member of the bird family, and you're dead game on dogs, that's sure." "Oh, it was splendid!" exclaimed the girl, and both boys now saw that she was a very pretty little miss, with sparkling blue eyes and golden locks. "I shall never forget how brave you were. That terrible dog would have bitten me, I just know. I was so silly to cross this field to save time." She insisted on shaking hands with each of the lads, though naturally it was Andy who took the greater share of her attention. Just then a loud, hoarse voice broke in upon them. Looking up, they were surprised to see a big, rough-looking man, evidently the farmer himself, coming toward them. He carried a gun in his hands, and had all the appearance of anger in his manner. "Just stand where you be, you scamps," he bellowed as he made threatening gestures with the gun. "Don't you try to run away or I'll give you something you'll never forget. Maul my prize dog, will you? And on my private grounds. I got the law back of me, and you'll pay damages or go to jail. Hear that, consarn ya?" Of course, neither of the boys thought of running. Why should they when their precious aeroplane lay there close at hand? Evidently the excited farmer had not yet noticed this, or if so may have taken it for some new species of motorcycle. His entire attention seemed to be wrapped up in keeping the boys from fleeing. He was figuring on taking advantage of his rights, and exacting heavy toll for the assault on his dog. He came on until within 10 feet of the boys. Andy still held that useful monkey wrench in his left hand, having transferred it at the time the girl insisted on taking her little white hand in his. The enraged and suspicious farmer must have noticed this, for he suddenly started to bellowing again. "Put up your hands, both of you," he exclaimed, waving the gun threateningly. "You be desperate scoundrels, I take it, and I don't mean to give you any chance to treat me like you done my dog. $50 wouldn't buy that critter, and like as not he won't never be any use arter this. I'm going to march you both to the town lockup right away. Don't you move a hand, consarn you." "Mr. Sweezy, how dare you? These boys are my friends." And as she uttered these words in an indignant voice, the girl stamped her little foot on the ground. "Hey, what? Oh, was that you, Miss Alice? Sho no, I never knowed you, miss," the old man stammered, looking toward the girl for the first time. "I was coming to your house with an important paper my father asked me to hand you when he heard me say I meant to take a long walk. I crossed this field to make a shortcut, as I've often done before. That terrible dog of yours was loose, although you have been warned against allowing it, and you would have attacked me, only that these brave boys came to my assistance. I shall tell my father about it, you can depend, sir." All the bravado had vanished from the farmer by now. He seemed to fairly cringe before the girl. Afterwards the boys learned that there was good reason for this, since her father was Mayor Stevens, the richest man in Hazenhurst, and the farmer a tenant who was forever behind in his rents, and heavily in the debt of the owner of the place. "I didn't mean to run him in, Miss Alice," he hastened to explain. "I was just a-trying to skeer him, you know. I've had heaps of trouble with boys from town, and in course I thought they was up to more of the tricks. Taj broke loose this morning, but perhaps he just got what he orter had from this brave boy. I'm awful glad he didn't bite you, miss, and I hopes you won't complain to your governor." "I'll think it over, Mr. Sweeney," replied the girl, somewhat softened by his abject demeanor. "Here is the paper father wanted me to take to you. I think I'd better be going back to town after this, and I promise you I'll never again cross this field." She turned her back on him and looked toward the biplane. "How wonderful that you should have come to my help in that way," she said. "Well, the fact is, Miss Alice," remarked Andy, quick to catch the name used by the old farmer, "we were on our way to Hazenhurst, meaning to drop down on the commons and give your people over here a chance to see what a biplane looked like, while my cousin Frank Bird was making a few little changes in this new machine when we happened to see the dog chasing after you. Then we dropped down in a big hurry, but fortunately no damage was done." "Oh, are you the famous bird boys I've heard so much about?" she exclaimed, at which Andy turned red in the face and, laughing awkwardly, replied, "I'm Andy Bird, all right, and this is my cousin Frank, the head and brains of the combine, but as to our being famous, that's all a mistake. We have taken up aviation as a business, and mean to follow it. My father was a well-known aviator, so you see it runs in the blood. You live in Hazenhurst, I suppose, Miss Alice." And it was at this point the pretty girl informed them who she was. "Oh, I hope you will stay long enough by the Liberty pole for me to get back," she observed eagerly. Andy nodded his head. "Oh, I can promise you that we're not going to be in any very great hurry to start back home. Why, we might even have to wait a whole hour. There are lots of little things to be done, you see," and as he said this, Andy gave his cousin a sly kick on the shin with his toe, which was apparently understood by Frank, since he did not venture to say a word in opposition to what had been spoken, though, truth to tell, he believed 10 minutes would have sufficed him to make what little changes he had in mind. "Then I'll start right away," Alice declared, "and as I chance to be a good walker, I will show up inside of 15 minutes at the most." She shook hands with them again and started toward the road. The old farmer, with bulging eyes, watched the two lads get their biplane ready, and obeying Frank's request, even gave a shove at the proper instant. Then he stood there, craning his scrawny neck as he watched the great bird-like object soar upwards, hardly able to believe that he had actually assisted in the launching of one of the modern miracles that had conquered the forces of the upper air currents. Andy was watching, and as they sailed over the road where Miss Alice was trudging back to town, he shouted a greeting and waved his handkerchief, to be delighted by a return salute. "If I'd just dared, Frank," said Andy regretfully, I'd have offered to take her to town along with us, but I was afraid you'd say no." "Which I certainly would," replied his cousin immediately. "It may be all right for us to risk our lives in the way we do, but I don't believe we have any business to take chances with that of another, except under certain conditions. If we had to take up someone to save them from peril, that would be all right. Now, here we are at the Commons, Andy." "Wow, look at the people rushing out of the houses," cried Andy, "would you? I guess this is the biggest thing that's happened at Hazelhurst for a whole year of Sundays. Hope they give us plenty of elbow room to land. If they push in too far, somebody is going to get hurt." Frank called out in time, and the crowd swayed back, so that presently the wonderful biplane dropped as lightly as a feather on the beautiful green commons, and close to the foot of the Liberty pole. "Please keep back before you do any damage," Frank exclaimed. Fortunately, there were some sensible fellows present who realized the need of care, and when these athletic young chaps had formed a ring around the aeroplane, Frank breathed more freely again. He went about making his little changes leisurely, while Andy did most of the talking and answering the multitude of questions that were fired at them. When the good people of Hazelhurst learned that these two modest young chaps were the Bird Boys, of whom they had heard and read so much, they were loud in expression of pleasure at welcoming them to the town. And when later on Andy told them of the contemplated race, they declared that everybody in Hazelhurst would surely be on hand to see the two contestants turn around the Liberty pole. Of course, Miss Alice arrived, even ahead of scheduled time, which would indicate that she had indeed hurried. And presently the boys were introduced to her father, and had to receive his hearty thanks after he learned how greatly the Stevens family were indebted to them. But Frank noticed with secret pleasure that the girl entered no complaint against the old farmer, from which he understood she had come to the wise conclusion that a lot of good had sprung out of the chance meeting that might never have happened only for tides breaking loose that morning. And later on, when the biplane arose gracefully from Hazelhurst Green, a mighty roar of cheers attested to the fact that the Bird Boys had succeeded in making a very favorable impression, not only on Miss Alice and her father, but the rank and file of the townspeople as well. End of chapter 18.